My skull bounced off the metal table so violently that my ears rang and my vision blurred white. The commander's palm crushed the back of my neck, pinning me in place like an animal, while the other sailors stood there, watching, silent, as if my suffering was just another part of their shift. "Speak," he roared, twisting my wrist until bone scraped bone. "You're here to work. You do what I say." They all believed the same lie, that I was just another woman his men had kidnapped off the coast. Another body smuggled onto this base for the commander's dirtier orders. Another victim to break in the dark. None of them knew the truth. Not the guards. Not the recruits. Not even the monsters who dragged me into this room. They didn't know the woman they were torturing. The woman they chained. The woman they slapped, kicked, stripped of dignity. Was the most dangerous officer in the United States Navy. They didn't know they had an admiral on that table. A Navy SEAL Admiral. Undercover. Classified. Designated to hunt the exact men who thought they owned me. And the moment the commander slammed my head down and hissed, "I don't give AF **K who you are," he made the deadliest mistake of his life. Because I wasn't taken to serve him. I volunteered to be captured, so I could end every man in this room from the inside. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because this is the mission they buried so deep. The Navy pretends it never existed. The moment his hand left the back of my neck, my body went limp, not from weakness, but from calculation. Every second I stayed still, every breath I swallowed, every insult I absorbed was part of an operation I had prepared for months. My real name is Admiral Avellini Ward, though almost no one alive is allowed to speak it. To the official Navy record, I died 7 years ago in a training explosion off Coronado. A funeral was held. A flag was folded. A casket was lowered. But I wasn't inside it. I was reassigned to a classification deep enough that even admirals don't have clearance for. Code designation: Spectre 1. The only covert Navy SEAL Admiral in active existence. From that day forward, my life belonged to shadows. The Pentagon handed me missions that were never written down. Operations buried so deep that even the teams who carried them out couldn't speak of them. And when intelligence surfaced about a trafficking pipeline operating inside one of our own installations, protected, funded, and expanded by men wearing the same uniform I once saluted, I volunteered before the briefing even ended. A network that kidnaps women along the coast, smuggles them through ports disguised as naval cargo, feeds them into a hidden complex beneath a training facility, breaks them, uses them, sells them. A network run by one man, Commander Holt. My superiors believed we needed drones, surveillance, and months of reconnaissance. They were wrong. We needed an admiral behind enemy lines. And the only way in was to become cargo myself. So I disappeared from the grid. I walked the shoreline alone. And I let them take me. The grab was fast. A van. A hood. A needle. When I woke, I was zip-tied, gagged, half-starved, and tossed among other victims who believed their lives had already ended. I let my muscles shake. I let my breathing quicken. I let them see fear I didn't feel. Every bruise helped me blend in. Every shove helped me memorize the route. Every insult gave me a read on chain of command. Pain became a tool. Humiliation became camouflage. Silence became a weapon sharper than any blade. By the time they dragged me through the gates of the base, I already knew. The rotation of the guards. The cadence of their footsteps. The smell of the tunnels beneath the compound. The number of victims processed each week. And which officers were connected to which buyers. By the time they threw me into the cell, I knew the names of every man who needed to fall. By the time the commander slammed my face onto that metal table, I knew he was the last piece I needed to bring the entire pipeline down in one night. He thought he owned me. He thought he dominated me. He thought he broke me. But in reality, He had no idea that every second of his cruelty brought me closer to my objective. That cell wasn't my prison. It was my staging ground. The perfect insertion point for a mission the Pentagon had already buried. Every slap, every kick, every snapped nerve in my wrist. They were currency. And I was buying information. For the moment I would bring his entire empire to its knees. I knew Holt's network wouldn't make a mistake twice. They only hunted women who were isolated, unprotected, and far from anyone who could raise an alarm. So to reach them, I had to become the perfect target. I shut down every digital trace tied to my cover identity, no phone, no tracker, no satellite ping. I left my rented car at an abandoned pier and walked into the kind of fog that swallows women without leaving echoes behind. I didn't bring a weapon. Weapons would comfort me. Comfort gets you killed in operations like this. I needed to look like prey. The shoreline was empty. Wind cutting across the rocks. Waves breaking with that slow, dragging rhythm that makes you feel watched. And I was. Long before I reached the waterline, they were already tracking me. Quiet shoes on gravel, a van engine humming low behind rusted containers, the metallic shift of a rifle sling. When the men finally moved, they did it clean. 2 from behind. 1 from the side. A gloved hand across my mouth, a needle in my neck, a hard shove to the knees. I let my body collapse. I let my breath stutter. I let my eyes flutter shut. Not resisting was harder than resisting. Every instinct, every muscle honed by decades of SEAL training, begged to break bones. But I kept myself still, loose, compliant. The only way inside their operation was through the route their victims took. And victims don't fight. When they lifted me into the van, they didn't bother to restrain my legs. That told me they expected no fight. That told me they'd broken enough women to believe fear was universal. A mistake I would file for later. They zip-tied my wrists behind me, gagged me, and pulled a thick hood over my head, black cloth that smelled of sweat and old blood. But darkness never stops information. A good operator listens. I counted everything. The slam of the van door told me it was reinforced. The spacing of the seats told me 6 men were inside. The cadence of their breathing told me 2 were veterans and 4 were new to this. The engine growled. We moved. Every turn became a breadcrumb. Left onto a main road, 60 seconds straight, sharp right onto gravel. The van dipped twice, meaning 2 small valleys. Speed changed 3 times. At 9 minutes in, a jet overhead a known flight route. At 14 minutes, saltwater smell faded, replaced by diesel and dust. They thought they were transporting a victim. I was memorizing a map. When the van stopped, the men dragged me out with the casual brutality of routine. Boots crunched over sand and broken stone. A metal gate buzzed open, heavy, industrial, and we passed through. The air changed. Cooler. Filtered. Not outside anymore. A military-grade door sealed behind us with a hydraulic hiss. I kept my breathing ragged, my shoulders slumped, my legs unsteady, letting them think I was slipping deeper into fear. But behind that hood, every detail burned into memory. The scrape of a keycard. An elevator descending. 2 guards shifting weapons on their slings. The faint hum of underground power generators. This wasn't a rogue hideout. This was a facility built with naval funding. The deeper they took me, the darker it smelled, concrete, oil, sweat, and the metallic sting of blood. Women cry differently when they know rescue isn't coming. I heard that kind of crying echo through the hallways. When they finally cut the zip ties and ripped off the hood, the light stabbed into my eyes, but I didn't blink. Blinking is what victims do. Instead, I stared straight ahead, empty and broken, the way they expected. A guard grabbed my jaw, checking my eyes like livestock. Too quiet, he muttered. Quiet ones break easier, the other replied. If only they knew. They thought they were welcoming another body for the commander's dirty work. Another prisoner to condition, exploit, and discard in silence. But the truth was far simpler. I walked into this place like a victim, so I could walk out as its destroyer. They didn't capture me. They delivered themselves to me. And the moment the cell door slammed behind me, locking me into their world, they sealed their own fate. Because once I was inside these walls, the hunt had already begun. Commander Holt entered the room long before I saw him. Men like him always announced themselves without speaking. The sudden stiffening of the guards, the quick straightening of spines, the way silence spreads like an infection when true fear walks in. He carried power the way some men carry weapons. Carelessly, arrogantly, certain no one would ever make him bleed for it. His boots were the first thing I heard. Heavy, deliberate steps that struck the concrete with the confidence of a man who believed the world beneath him was already his. When he finally stepped into the light, he didn't need a rank patch to confirm who he was. His authority hung off him like armor. Thick-necked, squared shoulders, the cold, dead eyes of someone who had done unspeakable things for so long that they registered as routine. Commander Holt. Decorated. Untouchable. Protected by the very uniform he desecrated. The man responsible for hundreds of vanished women. The man whose victims were carried out in crates no one dared inspect. The man whose training unit was nothing but a front. A machine that crushed human lives and sold whatever pieces remained. And this monster believed I belonged to him. He moved toward me with the ease of a man selecting a tool from a shelf. His gaze slid over my body like he was appraising merchandise. Not a person. Not a prisoner. Just inventory. He didn't see the admiral he should have saluted. He didn't see the SEAL who could dismantle him bone by bone. He didn't see the woman sent specifically to end him. He saw what he wanted to see. A captured woman with no one coming for her. He approached until I could feel the heat of his breath. There was no humanity in it. Only ownership. He caught my chin between his fingers. Rough, calloused, uninvited. He turned my head left, then right, as if checking for defects. His grip was clinical, detached, practiced. This was not his first inspection. This was a ritual. Another quiet one, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone in the room. They break fast. The guards chuckled under their breath, obedient hyenas circling their lion. I kept my eyes empty. Broken. Dull. Exactly what he expected. Because men like Holt don't fear women who look defeated. They fear the ones who don't. He tapped the collarbone he'd bruised earlier. His smile was small and terrifying. She'll learn, he said. They always learn. Behind him, 2 officers stood stiff as statues. Lieutenants with bars on their chests and terror in their eyes. They were not nervous for me. They were nervous for themselves. Because one mistake in front of Holt didn't mean reprimand. It meant disappearance. He created that fear intentionally. He fed on it. Holt believed he owned every soul trapped inside his walls. Women. Recruits. Junior officers. No one was exempt from his control. He had built an empire of silence, protected by ranks and regulations that shielded him from scrutiny. And now he believed he owned me. His hands, the same hands that had crushed my face into that table, had no idea whose skin they rested on. No idea whose life they were gripping. No idea that the woman he was manhandling could strip every ribbon off his uniform and every heartbeat from his future. No idea that he was laying hands on the one person in the United States Navy who outranked him so completely that his entire career, his entire operation, existed beneath the dirt under my boots. But predators blinded by power never look up. And Holt never imagined a ghost could wear a victim's face. He leaned in closer, voice low enough only I could hear. You belong to me now. If he had known who those words were spoken to, if he had known the depth of the mistake he had just made, he would have fallen to his knees and begged for mercy no one was ever going to give him. But he didn't know. And that ignorance was the last protection he would ever have. Because in that moment, as his fingers dug into my jaw and his ego filled the room, I made a promise in silence. I would end him. And I would end every man who enabled him. from the inside out, piece by piece. And not a single one of them would see it coming. Holt didn't waste time. The moment he finished inspecting me, his hand snapped across my face, open palm, all power, no hesitation. The crack of it echoed against the concrete walls, a sound his men had heard too many times to flinch at. My head snapped sideways. I let it. He gripped the back of my neck, same place as before, same force, and dragged me across the cell floor like he was hauling a dead weight. My skin scraped against the rough concrete, tearing, burning. The sting traveled up my spine, but I didn't allow my muscles to tense. Pain is information. And in that moment, I needed to learn everything. He threw me against the far wall, and my shoulder took the impact. To him, it was dominance. To me, it was mapping, distance, structure, texture, angles. Another slap. A fist to the ribs. A boot to the thigh. I absorbed each blow the way concrete absorbs footsteps, quietly, collecting data with every impact. The sailors stationed outside shifted uneasily. They pretended amusement, forcing out nervous laughter because Holt expected it. But their eyes told the truth. They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing so Holt wouldn't turn his attention on them. The victims across the corridor weren't so lucky. Their eyes were hollow, quivering, desperate. They had seen this routine before. They knew how it ended for most women who shook under Holt's hand. But I didn't shake. That confused them. That confused Holt even more. He pressed his forearm across my throat, pinning me to the wall, waiting for me to claw at his arm the way the others did. I didn't lift a hand. He wanted struggle. He wanted fear. He wanted me to beg so he could believe he'd broken something strong. Instead, he got stillness. Stillness from a woman he assumed was prey. Stillness that had weight to it. Stillness that made him hesitate, just for a second. He masked it with another punch. My body folded to one knee. I let it. Not because the strike demanded it. Because the act of falling bought me more time to observe the men in the room. Their stances, their holsters, their reactions. It also reinforced the illusion he needed to see. A broken woman. Helpless. Crushed. Anything else triggered suspicion. Anything else risked lives far beyond mine. Because if I fought back here, if I retaliated, the consequences were instant and catastrophic. A single display of strength would have exposed me. Holt would have sounded the alarm. His officers would have executed the other women on site to erase evidence. The entire trafficking chain would have scattered in minutes. Hundreds of missing women would never surface again. So I stayed down. My breathing ragged. My hands limp. My gaze lowered. But inside, everything was sharp. Every nerve awake. Every second accounted for. Holt grabbed my hair and yanked my head up, forcing my gaze to meet his. He was expecting terror. He found emptiness. Not defiance. Not fear. Just absence. A void that didn't match the body he was abusing. His brows tightened, only slightly, but enough for me to notice the flicker of confusion in his eyes. Predators understand fight. They understand surrender. But they don't understand stillness. Stillness means control. Stillness means calculation. Stillness means something stronger than pain is taking place beneath the surface. And nothing unsettles a monster more than realizing the prey isn't behaving like prey. He shoved me aside with frustration instead of triumph. Because somewhere, deep in the part of his mind he refused to acknowledge, he felt the first, faint tremor of danger. Not because I had resisted, but because I hadn't. I forced my body to slump to the ground, swallowing the ache blooming along my ribs. The room went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not relieved quiet. The kind of quiet that grows out of confusion. Holt hated confusion. He kicked me once more, out of spite rather than dominance, and turned away with a growl. To his men, it looked like victory. To me, it was confirmation. He didn't understand me. He didn't recognize what he was looking at. He didn't see the storm he'd just placed inside his own walls. And monsters who don't understand their prey never survive the hunt. They threw me back into the cell like a sack of discarded gear. The door slammed shut with a metallic finality that would have broken anyone who still believed escape was possible. But I was never here to escape. I was here to dismantle everything. The cell was small, concrete walls, no window, a rusted drain in the corner, and a single overhead bulb that flickered like it was deciding whether or not to live. But to me, it wasn't a cage. It was reconnaissance. The first thing I did was listen. Not to the screams from down the hall. Not to the sobbing of women who didn't know if they'd see morning. Not even to the echo of Holt's boots retreating. I listened to patterns. Guards always reveal themselves through rhythm. You learn more from footsteps than words. One guard dragged his right heel. Another favored his left hip. A third walked with the steady cadence of military police, center of gravity perfect, posture unshakable. The dragging heel circled every 6 minutes. The limping one took 11 minutes per full patrol. The NP passed my door every 15. I memorized the spacing. I memorized the pauses. I memorized the size of boredom, the clicks of weapon safeties, the keys brushing against their belts. There is no such thing as an unbreakable pattern. Only patterns waiting to be exploited. The cameras overhead rotated at predictable intervals, 3 seconds left, 3 seconds right, full sweep every 14. Cheap models. Bad wiring. Blind spots big enough to hide a ghost. Perfect. The walls, despite their thickness, vibrated in places, subtle tremors that told me which rooms housed generators, which hallways echoed with movement, and which areas above me were accessed most frequently. You can tell the entire structure of a building by the way it breathes. The bed frame was bolted into the floor, but bolts loosen under pressure, heat, and time. I applied all three. Just brushing my weight against it, repeatedly, gently, working metal against metal until friction whispered secrets. On the 3rd hour, one bolt shifted. Barely. But it shifted. In operations like this, you don't wait for opportunity. You create it, millimeter by millimeter. The woman in the next cell sobbed softly. Real fear. Real despair. Not the kind you can fake. When the guards passed, I kept my head low, face hidden. When they disappeared, I lifted 2 fingers through the bars, tapping once, then twice. A signal any trained operative would recognize as communication. She wasn't trained, but she was human. And humans respond to hope when everything else is falling apart. Her crying paused. A fragile silence answered me. Good. Silent cooperation was safer than loud gratitude. I didn't need allies. I needed the guards to underestimate how aware I was. Every night, when the lights dimmed and the hallways grew quiet, I pretended to break. I cried soft, uneven sobs, exactly the kind they were used to hearing. The kind they understood. The kind that let them sleep easy, believing their hold on me was absolute. But while I cried, my mind sharpened. While tears streaked down my face, my ears mapped routes. While my body shook in the darkness, my fingers counted screws, bricks, imperfections in the concrete. I learned which guard lingered near the cells too long. I learned who avoided eye contact with me. I learned who enjoyed cruelty, who feared Holt, and who might crack under pressure. Information is currency. And I was stockpiling it. Pain helped too. Every bruise throbbed in a different pattern depending on how I leaned, sat, or breathed. Pain taught me the cracks in the floor. Pain taught me the weight of the door. Pain taught me the distance between footsteps. Most importantly, pain reminded me I was still in control. Because as long as I controlled my reaction, Holt controlled nothing. Every second they thought I was breaking. I was growing stronger, sharper, more prepared. The cell was not shrinking. The walls were not closing in. The opposite was happening. The longer I stayed here, the more the mission expanded. And the more I bled, the closer I came to ending every man who believed my suffering meant their victory. They had no idea what they were building in that cell. No idea what was forming in the silence. No idea what kind of storm they were feeding with every hit, every kick, every night of forced stillness. They thought I was trapped, but I was preparing. And preparation is the deadliest weapon an admiral can wield. It didn't take long for the system to notice something was wrong with me. Not Holt. Not yet. Monsters like him only see what they want to see. It started with one guard. A young one barely old enough to shave, too soft-eyed to belong in a place built on screams. He didn't know how to hide discomfort the way the others did. His gaze lingered too long each time he passed my cell. He watched the way I sat. Even when I slumped against the wall, there was structure beneath the collapse. Shoulders aligned, spine controlled, breathing measured with the precision of someone who had learned to calm her heart on sinking ships and burning desert sands. Victims don't sit like that. Victims curl inward, shake, whimper, fold in on themselves. I didn't. I sat like someone waiting. Waiting is more dangerous than fighting. He noticed. Then he noticed something else. My eyes. I kept them low and half-lidded, the way the broken do, but whenever the guards weren't looking directly at me, they sharpened. Tracked movement. Measured angles. Studied shadows. He caught that shift once. A flash of calculation where terror was supposed to live. I saw the recognition spark behind his eyes. Fear mixed with confusion. Not fear of me. Fear of what I wasn't. He didn't report it immediately. People rarely report what they don't understand. But that seed of doubt grew. The next day, when Holt dragged me out for his routine brutality, the same guard flinched. Only slightly. Only for a fraction of a second. But Holt saw everything around him the way predators sense tremors in the dark. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped. "Nothing, sir." Holt didn't believe him. He followed the guard's line of sight straight to me. And in that moment, he noticed something he had missed before. I wasn't trembling. Not even under his grip. Not under his kicks. Not under the weight of his fist hammering into my ribs. My body reacted. It had to. Flesh and bone obey impact. But my fear didn't. Because there was none. Holt gritted his teeth. Monsters don't like puzzles they can't solve. He shoved me down again, harder this time, watching closely for the flinch victims always give before a blow lands. I didn't give him one. He grabbed my face, forcing my chin upward, searching for panic in my eyes. He didn't find it. He found void. Control. Stillness that didn't belong in a cell meant to break human beings. His expression shifted. Barely. But enough. Suspicion. That was the first crack. "Get her up," he growled to the guards. 2 men grabbed my arms and hauled me to my feet. I let my body go limp enough to sell the illusion, but kept my balance centered. Even under restraint, I controlled the fall of my weight. Holt circled me like he was examining a malfunctioning tool. "You're too calm," he muttered. "Too quiet." The guard who had noticed earlier swallowed hard. He looked away. Holt slammed his fist into my stomach, deep, deliberate, aiming for the diaphragm. I absorbed it. Not because it didn't hurt. Because pain doesn't own me. His suspicion sharpened. He ordered the guards out. Just him and me. That was when the torture escalated. He punched harder. Kicked longer. Demanded pleas. Demanded crying. Demanded the panic that had soaked this cell for years. He got none of it. Every blow he delivered landed against flesh that refused to tremble. Every insult he screamed evaporated against silence that refused to break. He wanted fear. I gave him nothing. A predator can understand rage. A predator can understand defiance. But a predator who cannot provoke fear begins to fear instead. I saw it in the tightness around his jaw. In the twitch of frustration in his fingers. In the way his breaths grew shorter each time he struck me. He didn't know what I was. But he felt what I wasn't. And fear, a real fear, began to pull behind his eyes. Not fear of losing control. Not fear of breaking protocol. Fear of the unknown. The most dangerous fear in the world. By the time he ordered the guards back in, He was no longer beating me for dominance. He was beating me for answers he couldn't articulate. The guard saw it too. The limping guard whispered as they dragged me back toward the cell. "She's not normal." He was right. But not normal wasn't even close. Still, I let them think whatever they needed to think. Suspicion was fine. Fear was useful. But confirmation would have detonated the mission. So I let them break their knuckles on a woman who could kill all four with a broken chair leg. I let them waste their breath screaming at a ghost. And when they finally threw me back into the darkness of my cell, bruised, bleeding, half-conscious, I smiled. Not outwardly, not visibly, but deep where no camera could see. Because the moment suspicion is born, panic follows. Panic creates openings. Openings create mistakes. And mistakes are how empires fall. I sensed his arrival long before I saw him. It began with a shift in the air pressure, doors opening that usually stayed sealed, footsteps heavier than the guards, voices speaking in a language not native to the space. The hallway outside my cell tightened with tension, a tension even Holt couldn't command on his own. Important men carry a different kind of silence. It travels with them. I sat against the wall, head bowed, my body still aching from Holt's last attempt to understand me. But my mind sharpened the moment I heard the click of high-end boots, imported leather, hand-stitched soles, expensive, and out of place in a basement built for suffering. Then came the voice. Smooth. Measured. Deadly familiar. I knew it instantly. Viktor Karaev. International trafficker. Ghost on 6 continents. Untouchable by law enforcement, feared by insurgent groups, protected by corrupt governments, and hunted by me for 5 long years. I had chased him through false passports, shell companies, dead women's stolen identities, and border zones where human life meant less than spare ammunition. Every time, I'd missed him by hours, sometimes minutes. Now he was here. Inside Holt's base. Inside a U.S. naval compound. Which meant one thing. This operation wasn't local. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't the work of a rogue commander drunk on power. It was bigger. Structured. International. A pipeline built through military corridors, connecting supply chains across borders, feeding women from coastlines into global markets. Holt wasn't the architect. He was just a facilitator. A well-placed cog in a machine large enough to swallow nations whole. And Karaev coming here personally confirmed something far worse. This place wasn't a holding site. It was a distribution center. I didn't lift my head, but my heartbeat slowed. Not from fear. From calculation. If Karaev was here, the timeline had collapsed. Every hour he remained, another woman would be cataloged, assessed, and shipped out of the country, never to be seen again. Holt greeted him outside my cell, their voices low but sharp. "She's new," Holt said. Strong. Quiet. The type that lasts the longest. My stomach twisted. Not from the words, but from the knowledge that I'd heard that phrase before, in other countries, over other captives. Karaev's hallmark. He dealt in endurance. He valued durability over compliance. He preferred fighters. Breaking them was part of the thrill. Holt was pitching me like inventory. Karaev wanted to inspect me. I kept my breathing steady, shallow, pathetic, exactly what they expected. Karaev stepped closer. I could feel his presence like a shadow crawling across the floor. A hand moved under my chin, cleaner than Holt's, colder than ice. He lifted my face with a single finger, examining me the way a jeweler examines a diamond, calculating value, not humanity. His breath was steady, confident. He didn't fear Holt. He didn't fear the guards. He didn't fear consequences. People like Karaev believed the world belonged to them. His eyes, sharp, clinical, scanned my cheek, the bruise Holt had left, the dirt smudged into my jaw, the dried blood at my lip. His voice was soft. "This one will not break easily." If he had known how true that was, he would have run. Holt chuckled, puffing his chest. "Give me 24 hours," he said. "She'll be ready." 24 hours. That was all I had left. Because if Korov took me, my cover would follow me into a deeper hell with no structural weak points, no predictable rotations, no cameras, no walls I could map. And even if I escaped, the women left behind would never be found. I lowered my gaze, hiding the spark of recognition, the slow ignition of intent. Tonight is the night, I told myself. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not after more observation. Tonight. Because when an international trafficker meets a corrupt commander inside a U.S. military facility, the cost of waiting becomes paid in lives. Korov released my chin, satisfied. Holt smirked, thinking he'd impressed him. They turned to walk away, already discussing logistics, prices, transit routes. I watched their shadows recede. For the first time, Holt and I shared a single truth. Time was running out. Only difference? He thought it was running out for me. But tonight, it would be running out for him. And for the international network he believed would protect him. The clock didn't just begin ticking. It began counting down to their extinction. Night falls differently inside a place like this. It doesn't arrive with darkness. It arrives with silence. Heavy, suffocating, the kind that warns every thinking creature that something is about to happen. For the first time since I'd entered this facility, Holt didn't come for me. Not tonight. He was busy preparing Korov's inspection protocols, adjusting inventory logs, arranging transport schedules. He didn't realize he was preparing his own funeral. My cell was dimly lit, the bulb above me flickering in a pattern I'd already memorized. Every 31 seconds, it died long enough to give me 3 seconds of true darkness. 3 seconds is generous when you've spent your life operating in none. The first thing I freed was the screw, the one I'd loosen night after night with nothing but friction, patience, and the subtle leverage of my body weight. It was almost ready yesterday, but I hadn't pulled it then. Breaking out too early destroys a mission. Breaking out too late destroys lives. Tonight was neither. Tonight was perfect. The screw slid free with a soft metal sigh. I closed my fist around it, feeling its weight, small, sharp, deadly in the right hands. Mine were the right hands. The second weapon was already inside me. A thin strip of razored metal I'd hidden under my tongue the night Holt's men made the mistake of checking only my pockets and boots. They never checked the mouth. Predators don't imagine prey having teeth. I rolled the blade forward with the ease of practice, positioning it between the hinge of my jaw and the edge of my molars. A single swipe could open a throat before a man even realized he was dead. The third asset wasn't metal or muscle. It was memory. 3 blind spots in the hallway. One behind the fire suppression pipe. One beneath the flickering camera. One created by a warped metal panel that reflected light incorrectly. Most prisoners never notice them. Most guards never consider them. I built my escape inside them. When the bulb above me flickered its 31st second, I moved. In one smooth motion, I wedged the screw into the lock seam, used the blade to torque the mechanism, and snapped the rusted interior hinge. The door didn't swing open. It eased open silent, obedient, as if it, too, wanted out. The hallway was clear. I stepped into the first blind spot just as the limping guard turned the corner. His posture was bored. His weapon was slung lazily. He thought he was watching over beaten women. He never saw me. The screw punched into his carotid before he could inhale the first note of alarm. His body went limp, collapsing into my arms without sound. I lowered him gently, respectfully, because he had been cruel, but he had not been the architect. He died quickly, efficiently, the way soldiers deserve. The second guard was different. He was one of Holt's favorites, bigger, crueler, the kind who found pleasure in other people's pain. I waited for him in the shadow beneath the broken camera. The moment he stepped into the blind spot, I moved behind him, one arm around his throat, the blade dragging silently across his windpipe. He died with surprise in his eyes. surprised that prey could move like a predator. I wiped the blade on his uniform, pocketed his keycard, and stepped over his body without slowing. The women watched from behind their bars. Wide eyes. Silent fear. Silent hope. I didn't speak. Words waste time. Words get overheard. I used the guard's keycard and opened the first 3 cells quickly. The women inside staggered out weak, shaking, hollowed by weeks of terror. One tried to speak. I pressed a finger to her lips. Silence was survival. I guided them toward the darkened corridor, pointing to the exact places to stand. The exact angles that would keep them hidden behind piping, crates, and shadows. They obeyed. The 4th woman collapsed. Her legs couldn't carry her. I lifted her easily. The 5th still had the chain on her ankle. I snapped it with force, concentrated and silent. Some looked at me like I wasn't human. Like I was something pulled from nightmare or myth. I didn't correct them. Myth has its uses. We moved through the underground passages without a single sound. A line of ghosts following the one ghost their captors should have feared. Every bruise on my skin pulsed with purpose. Every cut sharpened my resolve. Every insult Holt had thrown at me replayed in my mind not as humiliation, but as fuel. Pain became focus. Focus became direction. Direction became lethality. The facility that had seemed impenetrable a day ago now unfolded around me like an open book. I counted guards by the sound of their radios. I identified security nodes by the hum of their circuitry. I bypassed checkpoints by timing the rotation of sensors down to the heartbeat. I didn't need luck. I had preparation. And preparation wins wars. By the time we reached the upper access corridor, we had left 2 bodies behind us, silenced every camera that mattered, and threaded through the facility without leaving a footprint. No alarm. No gunfire. No panic. Just silence. Just shadow. Just the slow, inevitable collapse of Holt's empire. I pressed the final woman's trembling hand into mine and pointed her toward the ventilation shaft that led to the outer storage wing. She whispered, "Who are you?" I looked at her, calm and steady. Someone they shouldn't have taken. I sealed her inside the vent, ensured the path was clear, and stood alone once more in the darkness of the corridor. The base wasn't awake yet. But it would be. Because the moment I freed those women, the mission shifted from infiltration to destruction. Tonight, I stopped being their victim. Tonight, I became their ending. Holt's office sat above the lower corridors like a throne built on misery. Glass walls. Steel desk. Monitors showing every hallway except the ones I had already erased from his control. He stood there with the confidence of a man who believed the world outside those walls still belonged to him. He hadn't seen the bodies yet. He hadn't discovered the missing prisoners. He hadn't realized his kingdom was already burning from underneath. I stepped inside without sound. He didn't look up at first. Too busy reviewing shipment schedules, transport manifests, and the price tags assigned to human lives. His pen scratched across paper until a subtle shift in the air, my presence, made him pause. He turned. His eyes registered me slowly, like his brain refused to accept what it was seeing. Blood drying across my face. Bruises blooming purple across my ribs. Dirt streaked across my arms. Every mark he'd left on me still visible. And yet I stood upright, calm, silent. Like nothing he had done mattered. It didn't. He reached for the weapon on his desk. I moved before metal even touched his skin. 3 steps. That was all it took to cross the distance. 3 steps measured, balanced, executed with the cold precision of a SEAL who had spent her life eliminating threats faster than they could breathe. I caught his wrist mid-draw. Twisted. Not enough to break, just enough to remind him of his bones. He gasped, high, sharp, disbelieving. His other hand flew toward the emergency security switch. I grabbed the front of his uniform and slammed him back against the wall. The switch remained untouched. He stared at me, chest heaving, the false confidence draining from his eyes. Fear replaced it. Not panic. Panic is human. This was something deeper. Recognition. He studied my face, desperate to understand, desperate to place the mistake he'd missed. Then, with a voice scraped raw by disbelief, he whispered, "Who are you?" I leaned in close, letting him feel every ounce of the truth he had never imagined. "Your Admiral." The words hit him harder than my fists ever could. His knees gave out instantly, like someone had cut the strings from a marionette. He collapsed against the wall, sliding downward, the full weight of his ignorance finally crushing him. "No," he breathed. "Impossible. You're..." He couldn't finish. Predators rarely do when they realize they've been hunting the wrong thing. I watched the realization settle into him, that the woman he had slapped, kicked, and dragged across his floors was the highest-ranking covert operative in the United States Navy. A woman whose authority outweighed his existence. A woman whose silence had been his only shield. Now that silence was gone. He raised shaking hands, as if surrender could erase what he had done. As if surrender could undo every life he'd destroyed. "Please," he whispered. A word he had never given any of his victims. A word he believed would save him because he had never understood the weight of it. I didn't strike him. Not yet. The punishment had to fit the crime, and death was not his punishment. Living with the truth was worse. I crouched to his level, locking eyes with him. "You dragged me into that cell," I said softly. "You laid hands on me. You tortured the one person who could have saved you." He swallowed, trembling so violently the metals on his chest clinked together. "I didn't know," he whispered. I didn't." "That," I interrupted, "was your mistake. Not the trafficking. Not the beatings. Not the empire of suffering he built under Navy camouflage. Those crimes would end him in court. But the mistake that destroyed him tonight, the mistake that brought me into this office, was simpler. He had touched the wrong woman. His power evaporated. His command dissolved. His world shattered. And as he stared at me, broken and small on the floor of the empire he'd built, he realized the truth. The most powerful woman in the Navy, the admiral he had never dared imagine, was the same woman he had dragged by the hair across a concrete floor. The same woman he had called worthless, disposable, owned. Now she was the executioner of his legacy. I stood, letting him kneel there in the ruins of his authority. "Get up," I said. He couldn't. His knees were done serving him. His world had collapsed. And it had collapsed under my quiet, calculated hand. The moment Holt's knees hit the floor beneath him, the sky answered. It began with a distant tremor, barely audible, barely real, until the vibrations settled into the bones of the building. A low hum. A rolling thunder. A familiar sound no criminal on Earth ever wants to hear. Rotors. Black Hawks. Not Navy standard. Not military issue marked. These belong to another realm entirely. The realm where missions don't exist on paper and pilots don't speak outside the cockpit. I straightened, leaving Holt trembling at my feet, and walked to the glass wall of his office. Searchlights swept across the compound from above, slicing through the darkness like steel. The air shook under the force of the descending helicopters, their engines roaring with the precision of machines meant to end wars before they start. Holt scrambled to his feet, panic blooming across his face. No, this wasn't supposed to. I didn't need to speak. His reaction confirmed everything he feared. Outside, the first rope hit the ground. Operators, faceless, unmarked, armored in matte black, slid down with the speed and silence of falling blades. No insignia. No names. Just purpose. They hit the ground running. Within seconds, the compound erupted into coordinated chaos. Not disorder, but controlled annihilation. The tunnels were cleared first. I heard the muffled thud of suppressed shots, the sharp crack of breaching charges, the rapid-fire commands spoken in short, lethal bursts. Every sound was familiar. Every sound was home. Holt staggered backward, palms raised uselessly. "Call them off," he begged. You can stop this." I walked past him toward the door. "You stopped this," I said quietly, 5 years too late. In the hall, 2 operators appeared, massive silhouettes moving with predatory efficiency. They swept each doorway, clearing angles, their rifles trained with unwavering precision. When they saw me, they froze. Not in fear, in recognition. Their barrels dipped instantly. Their postures shifted. And in a movement rarer than any salute on Earth, they bowed their heads. Only one person in the Navy earns that silence. Only one. I nodded once, a small gesture with the weight of command behind it. They stepped aside, creating a clear path. As I walked, the base fell apart around me with beautiful precision. Buyers were dragged from hidden rooms, cuffed with their faces pressed to concrete, the facade of power stripped clean. Officers tried to run. None made it past the perimeter. Elite operators cornered them with the quiet efficiency of men who didn't come here to negotiate. Women, shaking, exhausted, half-starved, were lifted into the arms of medics and carried toward evacuation zones. Some cried. Some laughed in disbelief. Some simply collapsed, freed from a nightmare that had swallowed entire years of their lives. Tunnels that had once been arteries of trafficking were illuminated by the harsh white of tactical lights, every route documented, every ledger seized, every secret dragged into the open. The entire operation, years in the making, collapsed in minutes. That's the difference between criminals and professionals. Criminals build floors of rot. Professionals knock down the entire structure without leaving dust. A squad escorted Holt out of his office. His wrists were shackled. His face was pale. His world, built on screams and shadows, was gone. He kept searching for me, as if I could undo this. As if the woman he dragged across concrete could save him now. He found me standing near the loading bay, watching as the last victims were lifted into the helicopter. "You planned this," he whispered, voice cracking. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The Black Hawks thundered overhead, stirring the night air with the force of justice delivered without delay. The operators lined up, forming a path to escort me out, a silent corridor of respect, carved from men who knew exactly what kind of mission this had been. I walked through them as the final fires of Holt's empire burned behind me. Not a word. Not a salute. Not a command. Just quiet acknowledgement. Only one person in the Navy receives that kind of silence. And she does not need applause. She only needs the mission. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the compound was unrecognizable. The spotlights had gone dark. The alarm silent. The tunnels cleared of life and purpose. And Commander Holt, once the tyrant of these halls, was now shackled at the wrists and ankles, kneeling in the dirt with the rest of his officers. Their uniforms stained. Their medals stripped. Their ranks dissolved under the weight of what they'd built. They didn't look like soldiers anymore. Just men who finally understood consequence. The women who had endured this place were escorted toward military transport vehicles, wrapped in blankets, monitored by medics who whispered soft reassurances. Some clung to each other. Some stared into the distance, numb. Some prayed. All were alive. That was victory. Not the arrests. Not the takedown. Not even the destruction of the network. The lives saved, those were the only trophies that mattered. Pentagon teams moved through the compound like forensic ghosts, gathering hard drives, documents, money trails, and every scrap of evidence needed to collapse the broader trafficking web. They avoided the cells at first. Some doors were still cracked from breach charges. Others still carried the fingerprints of victims. And one door lay on the floor, twisted, bent, metal warped in the shape of force not designed for human hands. My force. The operators paused when they passed it. None touched it. None commented. They knew what it meant. They knew who had done it. And they also knew better than to speak her name. Names have power. Mine was meant to stay buried. I walked through the back gate quietly, moving as the last helicopter lifted off and the dawn wind carried the dust of a fallen empire away from the compound. The base behind me wasn't a victory monument. It was a graveyard of secrets. There were no medals waiting, no applause, no speeches from politicians who had never stepped foot into darkness like this. There weren't even debriefings from the operators who had stormed the base. They cleared a path for me and watched in silence. Not because they feared me, because they respected what I carried, what I was, a ghost. I didn't head toward the extraction vehicles or the secured perimeter where officers waited for reports. I didn't join the survivors or the rescued. Their stories belonged to daylight. Mine belonged to shadows. The sun was climbing over the horizon when I stepped past the perimeter fence, crossing the dirt road and disappearing into the tree line beyond the base. No one followed. No one called out. No one asked for anything more. That is the contract of men and women like me. We arrive without warning, complete the impossible, and disappear before the world wakes. The compound behind me would become a headline, an investigation, a series of court-martials, a public scandal. But not a single report would mention the woman who tore open its walls. Not a single document would carry my signature. Not a single courtroom would speak my name. That silence wasn't punishment. It was the proof that the mission was done. By the time the military convoy rolled out to transport Holt and his officers to federal holding, I was already miles away, boots coated in dirt, body aching, face streaked dry from blood I hadn't stopped to wash. I didn't look back. Ghosts don't. Somewhere inside that compound, in a cold concrete cell that used to hold victims, lay the twisted metal door I had ripped from its hinges. The only physical evidence I'd ever been inside those walls. It would confuse investigators, terrify officers, fuel rumors that intelligence would quietly deny. But it would stand as the last message I left behind. The right woman came through here. And then she vanished. Back into the place shadows come from. Back into silence. Back into missions that never reach the surface. I walked toward the rising sun. Alone. Uncelebrated. Unrecorded. And entirely at peace. Because ghosts don't need recognition. Only purpose. And mine had just begun.